Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Welcome to a special episode of the show brought to you in partnership with Arlington Economic Development, where we discuss issues related to the workforce, the role of place in the future of work, and the role of the creative sector in a larger business context. We call this Return on Creativity. Today we're going to talk about the future of nonprofits and what it will take to create and grow the nonprofit of the future, as well as some of the current challenges facing these organizations. To help me discuss this topic, I'm going to be welcoming 2 guests to the show, Sindy Yeh, Senior Business Ambassador at Arlington Economic Development, and Steve Blair, President of LIS, Lyceum Insurance Services. First, I'd like to welcome Sindy Yeh from Arlington Economic Development to the show. Sindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg, for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. Why don't we get started, though, by you giving a little background on your role at Arlington Economic Development and how it relates to nonprofits.
Sure. Yes. Good morning, Greg. I'm with Arlington County, Virginia, Department of Economic Development. I focus on business development and the marketing side of economic development. My role is to attract companies and businesses to Arlington and also work with existing organizations to make sure that they're pleased with the county and will continue to stay and grow. Nonprofit organizations and associations are one of the key industries in Arlington. And Arlington has about 300 nonprofit organizations that employ close to 8,500 people. So it's an important sector for Arlington's economy.
Great. Well, yeah, definitely looking forward to getting some of your insights on nonprofits. So let's get started with the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly affected all types of businesses, but nonprofits can be particularly vulnerable when money for donations can become more difficult to obtain. How has the Arlington nonprofit community weathered the latest challenges posed by the pandemic?
Very good question. But let me start by saying that not all nonprofits are created equal. Some nonprofits are doing very well and thriving during the pandemic. It really hasn't affected them. But I have to say, too, I believe early in the pandemic, it was especially challenging for many nonprofits throughout Arlington and the county, I may say. Arlington is the headquarters for a lot of nonprofits, foundations, and associations, both large ones with household names such as the American Diabetes Association and the Nature Conservancy that employs several hundred people and have thousands of members and volunteers. And to lesser known organizations, except to their own industries, such as organizations named such as the North American Millers Association and the USA Rice Federation. They're all headquartered in Arlington. And a large majority of these nonprofits generate revenues through membership, donations, hosting events and conferences. Well, almost overnight, the pandemic put a halt on these in-person conferences and events and stopped the association's largest revenue-generating sources. For those organizations with more reserves, they were able to tap into that reserve and continue to maintain programming and staff. However, I'm sad to say many organizations were forced to downsize by laying off staff and dramatically cut down on its programs and services. It's now 2 years into the pandemic, and I believe nonprofits had to adjust and pivot and are now just re-emerging and are stabilizing.
Well, yeah, and it sounds
Mhm,
like there's definitely a quite a diverse group of nonprofits in
mhm,
Arlington. How is an organization like Arlington
mhm,
Economic Development uniquely positioned to assist these nonprofits really
mhm.
of all kinds?
Well, I believe the qualities and assets that attracted nonprofits to Arlington and just the Washington, D.C. area are similar to what attracted for profit companies as well. Its proximity and easy access to decision and policy makers on Capitol Hill and the federal government, given that advocacy work is a heavy focus for many nonprofits, and access to highly skilled talent and workforce, and accessibility to transit, the three airports in the area, and just the abundance of amenities in this area, that attracted them to Arlington in the first place. Arlington is one of the most educated counties in the nation, with 75% of adults with bachelor's degrees, and 40% with advanced degrees. And some of the nation's top nonprofit management graduate programs are nearby, including like American University, George Mason University. So through the years, this area has developed a dense cluster of nonprofits and built up an ecosystem that surrounds it to make the nonprofit successful. The services that Arlington Economic Development offer nonprofits are similar to what we offer for profits, including acting as liaison for the organizations and making connections for them, whether it's to connect them with universities for their research and workforce needs, or to introduce them to potential partners and members, and to identify resources that could support their growth. Arlington Economic Development also promote our nonprofits via our marketing channels, whether it's through social media, online newsletter, press releases, etc., since we have several thousand business subscribers and followers. And during the pandemic, I just remember a special project that we did in August 2020. We celebrated National Nonprofit Day by creating a dedicated website focused on Arlington's nonprofit organizations. As I mentioned, there are close to 300 nonprofits in Arlington, and their missions cover a diverse set of issues. We focused on four main clusters for celebrating National Nonprofit Day. The four clusters are for environmental, international development, health and wellness, and local aid. That was the four main clusters of nonprofits in Arlington. Our website highlighted these four clusters and linked it to their nonprofit donation pages so people can donate and support Arlington's nonprofits. And I also want to mention Arlington County also works with several nonprofit organizations through Arlington's Community Development Fund each year for funding and assistance to support these nonprofits. The Community Development Fund provides grants through a combination of federal, state, and local sources. The addressed areas are in affordable housing, health, and self sufficient families and sustainable neighborhoods. So that's how Arlington County supports nonprofits.
Yeah, just a few
Yeah.
things there. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, no, that's great to great to hear. There's so much that you're able to do to really support these organizations as they grow and navigate the months ahead. So to that point, what does the future nonprofit look like? We've been through a lot of change over the last couple of years now, as you were just saying. How can a nonprofit position itself for stability, leverage partnerships like those with AED, as well as other organizations, in order to become more sustainable? Because who knows what's ahead.
Correct. I believe the pandemic actually forced many nonprofits to reevaluate its existing services and programs. I was just talking to several organizations, and they said that they had to take a hard look at all their services and programs and ended up eliminating several programs that are not generating the returns and benefits for the organization and their members. They realized that they were hosting perhaps events and programs just because they were doing it for year after year. The pandemic and slowdown allowed them to reevaluate where to devote resources and money that best serve the organization. And I also know several nonprofits started investing in technology, especially data analytics software for gathering business intelligence on its members, such as data on membership engagement, renewal rates, and these data will allow it to break down by geography and demographics, and to use the data for analysis to make better business decisions for these nonprofits. For example, there are several technology companies in Arlington that have developed a data analytics software exclusively for nonprofits to use. There's a company called Association Analytics that has developed a software platform that allows the associations to gather all of its data together in one place with an easy to read dashboards. So the associations, management can slice and dice the data with a few clicks and to gain insight into its membership. This allowed the association to use real time, solid data to make business decisions. Another tech company in Arlington is Higher Logic, and its software platform is to allow the nonprofits to better engage with its members and the community. And as I mentioned before, Arlington and the Washington area have a dense cluster of nonprofits, and there's an ecosystem, including for profit technology companies, that service and work with these nonprofits. Mhm.
To that point, what's one piece of advice that you have for nonprofits as they navigate the months ahead and chart a new course towards the future?
I would recommend the nonprofits to focus on their core mission and continue to do what they do best. It may require taking a hard look at all their existing programs and services and offerings, and unfortunately eliminate and reduce some that are no longer, best serving their organizations. I think this is how they could be mean and lean, and that's the best way to go forward.
One last question. How do these nonprofits learn more about the vast resources available from AED and as well as Arlington County?
Our staff at Arlington Economic Development routinely outreach to all our nonprofits and essentially all our companies in Arlington. We have a very robust business engagement program. We go out to visit them, physically go meet with them. Our staff go attend events and conferences. Some of them target nonprofits. We exhibit at some of these nonprofits, annual conferences. We attend their shows. So we are constantly out there. And we have a newsletter. We have an events calendar. We reach out to these, so these nonprofits can know we are around, and so they can take advantage of all the services and resources that we provide for these nonprofits.
Wonderful. That's great. Well, Sindy, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Next, I'd like to welcome Steve Blair from LIS, Lyceum Insurance Services, to the show. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't we start by you giving a little background on your role at LIS and how it relates to nonprofits.
Sure. Lyceum Insurance Services, LIS, is my company. I'm the owner and the president and the chief consultant here. And most of what I do is working in support of the nonprofit sector. I do work extensively in the for-profit sector, but I have a special place in my heart for nonprofits, and they account for probably around 80% of my total extensive block of business. And I just love working in the community. And I support, social service nonprofits all the way to trade associations and kind of everything in between. And it's really a unique marketplace because though many nonprofits operate much like you would think a for-profit company does. There are a unique set of parameters that really make the nonprofit sector a little bit different than for-profits, and it's that uniqueness that really makes it special for me, and I enjoy working in the space.
Great. Well, yeah, looking forward to talk about this topic with you. So, as you mentioned, you work a lot with nonprofits in your business and must see a lot of trends and changes in the space. So, let's talk through a few things here. How would you summarize the effect that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the nonprofits that you work with as it pertains to operations and the business side of things?
Yeah, I've really been in a unique situation because we do employee benefits consulting, and as such, we're directly involved working with health insurance and life and disability insurance, and all of these employee related benefits are directly impacted with COVID, especially since we're talking about caring for people's health. And I've been in a lot of direct communication, not only with my employer groups, the nonprofits, but their employees as well during this pandemic time. And I've been able to get a really nice perspective on the challenges that organizations are facing, as well as the challenges that employees are facing. And we've seen that turn into where people have moved on to other jobs and other things like that. So to kind of loop back around to your question, it's been very difficult for nonprofits, and they've gone through a lot of adjustment because with COVID, a lot of big things have affected organizations, whether it's through fundraising, whether it's through going through their mission, whether it's through interacting with their staff. From a fundraising perspective, we're seeing nonprofits being impacted in a number of ways. One of the big ways that I've seen is a lot of our nonprofits, they hold these big annual meetings, and those big annual meetings are a lot of their big fundraisers, and they haven't been able. We're starting to see more of this come into back into focus of in-person events, but all these events were in-person events, and it was pretty much like overnight that organizations had to scramble and decide, how are we going to manage this? We can't have an in-person event, and a majority of our annual budget comes from our fundraising efforts during these events, and so organizations were impacted, and they had to make a lot of decisions on the fly to moving from in-person events to virtual events, and having the right technology and policies and procedures in place to be able to host that type of event in a meaningful way that provided good information and content to members that were joining, but also for organizations to be able to capture the donations that they're looking for, and the direct impact on that on their bottom line. From a employment standpoint, all of a sudden overnight, people were in the office one day, and the next day they were working remote, and the challenges associated with that. There's a lot of advantages with people working remote, and a lot of and some disadvantages as well. I've heard people tell me, I don't ever want to go back to the office, and that's a challenge I think employers are facing right now, especially in trying to attract and retain employees. And I'll get to all of that next. But employees really enjoyed working from home in many ways, and it's funny, depending on the research that you read. I've seen both sides of this coin, where employees are saying, I have a way better work-life balance, but then I'm also reading articles and studies that show that employees also are getting burnt out because they're working longer hours than they were before, because they feel like they're always on. So it really depends on who you talk to and the type of research that you get. But this has led to a lot of challenges as employers are trying to decide, okay, what are we going to do moving forward? If employees are used to working on a remote basis, and now we're trying to get them to come back in the office. And I'm seeing my larger nonprofits are starting to work towards coming back to the office. My smaller nonprofits, so when I say smaller, nonprofits with less than 50 employees. And a lot of this really has to do with the industry too. I mean, if I'm a nonprofit that's serving, low income or homeless communities with medical care, obviously that's not something that can be done from home. But a lot of my organizations that can work from home are continuing to work from home, and the smaller ones seem to be staying remote. My larger nonprofits are starting to try to get employees to come into the office, and the most common kind of theme to that I'm seeing is bringing employees back on kind of a hybrid work basis where they're coming into the office for 2 or 3 days a week, and they're working from home the other days a week. And I think what's driving a lot of that from what I'm hearing is, number one, collaboration. Employers are feeling like employees aren't able to collaborate as well working remote. We're all getting kind of fatigued from Zooms and Slack conversations, and Slack has been a great tool in the nonprofit sector. A lot of my clients have adopted it, but it's text messaging, and it's great for the younger people that are used to using that type of medium to communicate. But something is lost, from just typing to having a conversation with somebody. And so there's been an issue where organizations are finding that, or feeling that, they're not getting the collaboration that they felt like they were getting prior to COVID. So they're trying to get employees to come back to the office at least on a part-time basis so that they can have those collaboration days. And my nonprofits that are really pushing that are those that, have big office spaces and multi-year long leases. And those are the ones that are really trying to get people to come back in, but they're doing so and being very thoughtful in how they come in, because the workspace has changed a little bit. So we're starting to see a lot more innovation in our nonprofits and in creating more flexible workspace, given that, people are coming in. I have some of my larger nonprofits are setting up ping pong tables and foosball tables and cornhole to be able to have events that, have activities that employees could do when they come into the office to make it a little bit more fun. And I think that's part of that whole flexibility of workspace. And in talking to a lot of the commercial real estate people that I network with, it's, a lot of them are saying that employers that are out looking for space right now are looking for that flex space, because even though somebody may not be in the office full time, you still have to have a seat for their butt when they do come in. So,
Right.
so they're just looking for more interesting ways to create workspace that not only helps employees feel safer when they're in the office, with having people spread out as opposed to being stacked on top of each other, putting in commercial air purification systems, having mask mandates when people are in the office. We're starting to see a lot of innovation from that. And I think nonprofits, given that they're very flexible and very people oriented in general, which is why I like to work with them. I think they're a good space to be able to, to drive some of this innovation within the workplace.
Yeah.
From another perspective is, though, that employees are feeling like they're being forced back into the office space, and that leads to some discontent. I was recently talking to somebody who was forced to come back to work full time in the office, and he had COVID 60 days prior and then just tested positive again. And he's like, I feel like my employer is making me come into the office, and now they're making me get sick by exposing me potentially to higher risk. And he's thinking, I may need to look for a new job.
Yeah, well, that actually brings me to the next topic too, which is related to COVID, but still a distinct topic. The Great Resignation, as they're calling it. There's a bunch of names for it, but it's affected businesses of all kinds, not just nonprofits. But from your standpoint, how has it uniquely affected nonprofits?
It's really affected. We've seen kind of overall our revenue for our organization is tied to employees being at work and having health insurance and these other benefits. And we've seen an impact to our revenues during the COVID time period because people started to move on, and they started to move on for a variety of different reasons. There's a lot more competitiveness as more organizations in a variety of different industries, instead of focusing their recruiting efforts locally, now you have a lot of national competition out there. And even though the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, specifically, we're talking about Arlington County here, is a major work hub and a major metropolitan area, you have organizations coming out of New York City and LA and Chicago, some of these really big markets that drive a lot of high level salaries that they're out recruiting with, competing against people in some, though metropolitan markets might be considered a little bit smaller than New York City. They're having trouble competing with the type of benefits and salaries that some of these other organizations are having. And so you're getting a lot of your senior talent getting picked off by other organizations that normally wouldn't have been recruiting in your marketplace. And I think a lot of it, there was a lot of mental health related and behavioral health related issues that came out of COVID, and people started saying, is this what I really want to do with my life? And so I talking to people that were like, you know what, I'm just not going to work for a bit. I've always thought about writing this book, and I'm going to step back from what I'm doing at work, and I'm going to take a sabbatical and either quit and move on, which we saw a lot, or just taking a temporary sabbatical for people to kind of decide, is this what I want to really be doing with my life? So we've seen, people, and another is innovation. I was talking to a number of senior people that have left their organizations to create their own organizations. So we've been seeing some innovation from that standpoint, where people are saying, all right, I think now's the time for me to kind of jump ship and start this thing that I've been wanting to do for a while. And a combination of all of those things has led to a lot of people moving on. And not only have people moved on to other careers, but people have moved on to where they're living.
Right.
A lot of my clients had employees that were living and working in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And it was like overnight, I was not only talking to people, on the West Coast and in more rural markets. A lot of people seem to move to more rural areas. But even overseas, I had people that were, I was talking to people that were like, I'm going to ride this out in Egypt or in Brazil and a lot of places around the country, around the world. All of a sudden it made the employers have a lot more challenges when it comes to communication. How are we going to actively communicate? And if we want to bring people in, how are we going to do that?
The reality is striking. While we can stream movies on demand and order anything to our doorstep within a click, healthcare interactions often feel needlessly complex. Healthcare marketers, this one's for you. In Shop, Stream, Heal, author Adeline Ashley shares actionable insights from industry leaders like Netflix, Amazon, and Delta, showing how healthcare can thoughtfully adapt their winning strategies. This isn't about technology for technology's sake. It's about making healthcare more accessible, intuitive, and human. Drawing from real-world successes and lessons learned, the book shows you how to create healthcare experiences that truly meet patient needs while preserving clinical excellence. Shop, Stream, Heal by Adeline Ashley features a foreword from Dave O'Flanagan, CEO of Sitecore. It's published by the Agile brand and now available in print and digital formats on Amazon. Go to shopstreamheal.com for more information.
And I've been reading a lot of studies during this resignation time where employers are having trouble attracting and retaining talent, of employees, where employers previously used to pay people that did work remote on a lower pay scale. And now they're trying to go back to that type of model and say, okay, well, if you're going to work remote, that's fine. But we're going to have to move your salary to this. The seat that's driving this right now is the employees. They have a lot more power than they had in the past. They're just straight up telling employers, no, if you want to cut my pay, I'm going to, there's other organizations out there that are very happy to hire me at the same, if not more money. So it's been a real big challenge for not only nonprofits, but other employers as well being impacted in this way.
Yeah. What do you see as being critical for nonprofits to invest in the months ahead as the world continues to evolve, as you've articulated here, not only from the early days of the pandemic, but just from even more recent events?
I think none, and I'm getting a lot of people calling me, especially with this great resignation, and they're like, where do we need to invest? What do we need to do to keep the people that we have and to be able to get new people in here that we need? And resoundingly, when you look at the data, number one is compensation. People, I think employers are going to have to make investments and increase their pay to be able to attract and retain. Number two is offering very good benefits, and many of my nonprofits offer good benefits, but that you only have so many dollars to work with when you have a budget. And if my number one is compensation and number two is health insurance, especially during this pandemic time when people are really wanting good coverage, I think employers are going to have to make investments in their people to protect, kind of like the sword and shield. I need a shield to block out, other entities trying to come and gather my staff and take them away. And I need a sword to go out there and attract employees and be a little bit more offensive and trying to get talent in. And the bottom line for that is organizations are going to have to make even more investments in their number one and number two, often general ledger items, compensation and employee benefits. And that depends on, employee benefits is going to be number two on that unless somebody's got a huge rent, and then it's number three, but it's always number two or number three, it seems, in terms of expenditures. Also, I think as we start seeing a lot more innovation within communications, whether that's making investments to be able to communicate better with our teams and find different ways to be able to collaborate if we're not going to be having people come back into the office. But also, from a nonprofit perspective, how can we either through making investments in technology or investments in social media marketing, how are we going to do a better job at communicating with our donors to ensure, especially if we're heading into a recession, which, all indicators seem to look like we are based off of everything that I've been reading, during recessionary periods, donors and donor dollars are directly impacted by that. And I think it behooves all organizations to make investments in ways, whether it is through direct communication or social media marketing, to be able to go out and continue to strengthen those ties with donors and keep that revenue flowing.
That's great. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. Someone that you and your company deal a lot with employee benefits. A lot of the things that you've mentioned reference, just offering flexibility and, as long as the work gets done, doesn't really matter how things get done. So, question for you is flexibility the new benefit?
I think it is. And it's funny that you say that. In particular, I was reading an article this morning just about that, that flexibility is going to be key. And employees, because they're working from home, they're often working more flexible hours. I mean, I myself yesterday, on Memorial Day, had 2 meetings with people that were like, I really need to talk to you. Can you talk to me on Memorial Day? And, I could have easily said no, but I said yes because I had the time and I was being flexible myself to be able to accommodate. And that flexibility is not only in, and this is one of the nice things about people working from home. If I have the flexibility, if I have to go to a doctor's appointment or I have to go bring something to my, cupcakes to my kid's school or whatever it happens to be, when I'm working from home, given, thinking about as long as I'm getting my work done, I have more flexibility. I can work a little bit before hours. I can work a little bit after hours. But if I'm giving the flexibility for my employees to say, hey, I have to go to the doctor's appointment today. Great. Go to the doctor's appointment and come home and finish your work.
Right.
It gives people a lot more options. And when you think about flexibility as a whole, think about kind of pre-pandemic when people were working in an office space and juggling taking kids to daycare and picking up kids from daycare and preparing meals for kids and, taking vacations and, having to plan, car maintenance and having to get gas and all these things that you think about that were kind of rote prior to COVID. when we started working from home, we got a lot more flexibility in how we were managing our childcare, we were managing our pets at home, or grocery shopping. And, there's so many. I just thinking about myself, my wife and I both work from home, and when we need groceries, we order them from the store and they're delivered to the front porch, and we get a break. We run down and grab them and throw them in the fridge and the pantry and back to work, So it really seems like having that flexibility really gives us a stronger work-life balance, because if employers are saying, yes, take that flexibility so that you can live your life to the fullest, while you're working, just make sure you're getting your work done. It really gives us that new kind of flavorful work-life balance that I think people are looking for and enjoying. And when I talk to people that are being forced back into the office, I'll be honest, a lot of them are saying they're thinking about maybe moving on, because they're losing that flexibility that they were given before. So
yeah,
it's something for employers to think about.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining here. Again, I'd like to thank Sindy Yeh, Senior Business Ambassador at Arlington Economic Development, and Steve Blair, President of Lyceum Insurance Services, for joining the show. To learn more about Return on Creativity, brought to you by the Agile brand and Arlington Economic Development, please go to returnoncreativity.com. Thanks for listening to the Agile brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.